75% of the oil may remain in the Gulf of Mexico. 79%. So is the White House answering all the questions they need to about this edited report? I talked about it earlier with Democratic strategist and New Orleans resident James Carville and Louisiana Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. Congressman, you were among the people who initially asked for this investigation. The Obama administration is basically saying this was an example of sloppy editing in the middle of the night, that neither the White House nor anyone at the Interior Department meant to actually mislead the American people about the moratorium and the scientists' support for it. Do you buy that?
Well, no, and in fact, the Inspector General's report confirms that the decision to impose this drilling moratorium was based on manipulated data by the administration. And so if they're going to say, well, it was either incompetence or manipulation, neither of those are acceptable answers for a decision that has cost over 12,000 people to lose their jobs in this industry.
Where do you see that it says manipulation?
Well, ultimately, they did change the report. The Inspector General's report doesn't even get into the details of whether or not Secretary Salazar manipulated himself when he presented a report to the president. They didn't include that report that was given to the president. So either they manipulated it or it was just incompetence, but either of those are unacceptable.
James, do you think it was just a mistake, or do you think there's more to it?
I don't know, and I read the article in Politico, and I'm a little bit confused, but I take these things seriously. You know, the IG report in 2007 about the corruption in the Minerals Management Service, and they didn't pay any attention to it, and I think that's a big result of what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm not one that thinks we should take these things lightly. Whether it was manipulate, probably a strong word to use right now, but there certainly is some sort of conflict as to what they had, and maybe it was hastily done. I don't know, but I didn't never like the moratorium from the get-go, and I'm a believer in sound science, and it should be used very, very, very carefully.
So when you're using that word manipulation, I just want to ask you about that, because basically what happened, it seems, is the sentence which said that, you know, the scientists had approved of all the things in this report, it was moved to be right after the sentence that talked about that there should be a moratorium, and it seemed to anybody who was reading it, it was implying that the scientists had agreed that there should be a moratorium, when in fact it was basically just saying the scientists agreed with other facts in the thing, nothing about the moratorium. Are you saying that you believe it was intentionally put there? Is that what you think is the manipulation?
Well, that's at the heart of the question, because when the 30-day report came out by the president's scientific experts, the report's final conclusion led people to believe that it was the scientists themselves who recommended the moratorium. And it was the scientists who came out later that day and said, wait a minute, we don't recommend the moratorium. In fact, we think it reduces safety in the Gulf, and don't attribute the moratorium to us because we disagree with it. And it wasn't until then that the administration backed off. But if the scientists wouldn't have come out and said that this wasn't their conclusion in the first place, would the administration have come clean? And in fact, that's one of the big questions we have.
But now a number of scientists apparently who've been interviewed in the wake of all this say that they don't believe that that was intentional, that Salazar apologized to them, made a public statement. Salazar has met with a number of them individually, and that they are convinced that it was not intentional.
Well, and I appreciate that they're going to take the administration at their word, but it's not our job to take the administration at their word when there are real documents that are out there that they haven't released yet. There was a memorandum that went from Secretary Salazar to the president when he was trying to get the president to conclude that there should be a moratorium. Now, did that recommendation from the secretary include or attribute this request for a moratorium to the scientists, or was it just something that they made based on a political calculation?
And James,
we don't know that yet.
And James, we may never know that because of executive privilege.
Yeah, we may not, and you know, I think they're going to probably invoke the Cheney doctrine here. But you know, I think the questions are fair to ask here. I mean, it was a decision that had severe impact on people in my state, and I think the Congress is right to ask questions. Whether or not this needs to rise to the level of some humongous investigation or not, I think is an open question at this juncture, and you know, I'd be very cautious about that. But it's certainly very fair to ask questions of this. This is a very big policy decision, and on the basis it was made is legitimate.
Congressman, do you want to see hearings on this?
Well, what I want to see is the administration come clean, because, Anderson, The administration themselves have acknowledged over 12,000 people have lost their jobs due to this moratorium. And if the moratorium's decision was based either on incompetence or manipulation, regardless, that's not acceptable to those families who now don't have the opportunities that they once had, because they don't want a BP check or an unemployment check. They want a paycheck, and clearly the data was manipulated that led to that decision.
James Carville, Congressman Steve Scalise, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Anderson.